Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're setting out on a seriously fascinating journey to demystify the unseen plumbing of the internet. We interact with the web literally every single day, seamlessly loading images, streaming music, firing off messages, but the sheer scale of the engineering that springs into action the moment we type a URL, it is nothing short of incredible. Our goal today is to break down that exact journey, taking all this complex networking infrastructure and turning it into clear, actionable insights for you. Have you ever actually thought about what happens behind the scenes when you press Enter? It's just a simple micro action, right? Just a single keystroke. But that tiny, everyday physical movement kicks off this massive digital commute, spanning the entire globe in a fraction of a millisecond. We're going to follow one single request as it leaves your computer, navigates the macro infrastructure of the global internet, and bounces back with your data. It's a remarkably cool process. By the end of this explainer, you are never going to look at a loading bar the same way again.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the journey. We'll start with typing the URL, then finding the IP address, looking at the root name servers, checking out the HTTP bottleneck, and finally, the HTTP evolution.
First up, Section 1, typing the URL. The whole journey actually begins right inside your browser bar. Let's break down the anatomy of a web address using this example right here, because each of these 4 parts tells the browser exactly what to do. First, you've got the scheme, the HTTPS. This dictates the protocol, basically telling your browser, hey, make a secure, encrypted connection using TLS. Next up is the domain, jennapeterson.dev. That's the memorable, human-readable address. Then we have the path, which here is /thepath2. You can think of this just like the folder structure on your own laptop. It organizes the files on the server. And finally, the resource, hello world, which is the specific piece of content you actually want to see.
All right, moving on to Section 2, finding the IP address. Here's the catch. Computers are absolutely terrible at remembering names like jennapeterson.dev. They need a numerical IP address.
So how exactly does the browser find the server? If it only has a name but desperately needs a number, who does it ask? The answer lies in one of the absolutely crucial systems of the entire internet structure.
And this brilliantly illustrates the role of DNS, or the domain name system. It is, quite literally, the contacts app of the internet. Think about it. Imagine if you lost all your phone's contacts today and suddenly had to memorize the 10-digit phone number for every single person you know. Honestly, it'd be impossible. Instead, you look up a friend's name and your phone quietly dials the number behind the scenes. Well, DNS does the exact same thing. It takes that human-readable domain name we just looked at and translates it into the numerical IP address your computer actually uses to route your request across the globe.
Which brings us to Section 3, the root name servers. To actually perform this DNS lookup, your browser often has to consult the absolute highest level of the internet's directory. 13. Yep, just 13. At the very top of the DNS hierarchy, there are exactly 13 logical root name servers in the whole world, labeled A through M. Now, you might be wondering, why such a specific and kind of small number? Well, it actually comes down to a legacy technical limitation. The original DNS specification limited unfragmented UDP data packets to exactly 512 bytes. And when engineers packed all the necessary IP addresses into that one single 512-byte response, they found that exactly 13 server addresses fit. So, 13 it was. Now, these 13 logical servers are vital to keeping the internet online, so they're managed by some incredibly massive, highly secure organizations. Just look at this. Server E is managed by the NASA Ames Research Center. Server H is run by the U.S. Army Research Lab, and Server J is operated by VeriSign. It's wild to realize that when you casually type in the URL, your laptop might literally be silently checking in with a server run by NASA just to figure out where to go.
But wait, here's where it gets even more interesting. While there are only 13 logical server addresses, there are actually 1,954 physical server instances deployed globally as of late 2025. How does that work? It's all thanks to a brilliant routing technique called Anycast addressing. Anycast allows multiple physical servers all over the world to share the exact same IP address. So when your computer reaches out to one of those 13 logical addresses, the internet's routers just automatically direct your requests to the physical server that happens to be geographically closest to you. This guarantees lightning-fast response times and, of course, massive fault tolerance.
And here's a mind-blowing detail for you. Despite their colossal physical footprint, the actual data these servers rely on is surprisingly tiny. They use something called the root zone file, which is a data set of only about 2 megabytes. That's smaller than a single photo on your phone. This tiny file is essentially the apex of the internet.
It doesn't hold every website. Instead, it's just a list pointing to the authoritative servers for over 1,500 top-level domains, like .com or .org. So the root server looks at this tiny 2 MB file and basically tells your browser, hey, I don't know the exact IP for jennapedersen.dev, but here's the server in charge of all .dev domains. Go ask them.
Moving right along to Section 4, the HTTP bottleneck. Now that your browser finally has the numerical IP address, the next step is actually connecting to it. For a long time, the gold standard for this was HTTP/1.1, but it had a really fundamental flaw.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the concept of head-of-line blocking. Just imagine a grocery store with only one checkout lane. Even if you're just popping in to buy a single candy bar, you are forced to stand in line behind someone with a massive, overflowing cart of groceries. That was basically HTTP/1.1. The browser could only handle one request at a time per connection. To try and fix this, browsers allowed a max of about 6 concurrent TCP connections to a single domain. But if a website had, say, 100 images, your browser had to awkwardly queue them up in batches of 6, forcing smaller, faster requests to just sit and wait behind larger ones. It created some seriously frustrating loading delays.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, the HTTP evolution. As the web rapidly transformed into a totally data-heavy environment, that single checkout lane just wasn't going to cut it anymore. It was time for a major upgrade.
Let's contrast those old limits of 1.1 against the next generation, HTTP/2. Released in 2015, this introduced true multiplexing. So instead of opening multiple TCP connections and awkwardly waiting in line, HTTP/2 uses a single connection and splits the data into separate streams. Awesome, right? It also brought in HPAC compression to shrink headers and save bandwidth. But there was still a catch. Actually, scratch that, it was a pretty big bottleneck. HTTP/2 still relied on the underlying TCP protocol. This meant that if just one single packet of data was lost in transit because of a spotty network, the TCP protocol would pause the entire connection to wait for that one packet to be resent. So the application-level blocking was fixed, but the TCP-level blocking was still very much there.
Let's move to HTTP/3 and see how it builds on and finally fixes those old limitations. HTTP/3 takes a huge, radical step. It completely ditches the old TCP protocol for a brand new transport protocol called QUIC, which operates over UDP. This delivers instant zero round-trip time handshakes, and the best part, it completely eliminates head-of-line blocking. So if a data packet for image A gets lost in transit, image B just continues to load right alongside it without any pause or interruption whatsoever. It's a real game changer.
But honestly, perhaps the most impactful feature for our daily lives is connection migration. Because HTTP3 uses a unique connection ID rather than tying the session to your IP address, it allows for seamless transitions between networks. Think about this. It's super relatable. You're streaming music on your home Wi-Fi. You walk out your front door, and your phone automatically switches to your LTE cellular network. Under older protocols, that IP change would immediately break the connection and your music would buffer or just drop completely. But with HTTP3's connection migration, your session survives that IP change effortlessly. Your music literally never skips a beat. Which leaves us with this final thought. The shift to HTTP/3 and this massive global infrastructure of root servers perfectly illustrates how the internet has been optimized for a resilient, mobile-first world. We've traced the whole journey, right from a simple keystroke all the way to the elimination of network bottlenecks. But as the sheer volume of global data continues to explode, we really have to ask ourselves, as our world goes mobile first, what invisible upgrades will the internet need next? Keep that in mind the next time you press enter. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.